Welcome to Life Stories, where we share the journeys of individuals who've overcome the odds and built something incredible from their struggles. Today's story is about Jake, a man who, after facing betrayal and heartbreak, left everything behind to build a new life. It's a story of resilience, of discovering strength in the face of adversity, and of finally finding closure. Join us as we dive into Jake's journey, one that proves the power of self-determination and the importance of never giving up. Subscribe to our channel to start today's story. My name is Jake, and I suppose my story begins the day everything I thought I had fell apart. Back then, I was just a guy in a small town in Ohio. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did. And nothing ever really changed. I was 23, working at the local hardware store, stacking lumber and ringing up nails for people who'd known me since I was a kid. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but it paid the bills. I had a life, and in that life, I had Lily. Lily was my world. She had dark hair that fell in soft waves around her face, and a laugh that was so contagious. It made the whole world seem a little lighter. We'd been together for 2 years. I was saving up for a ring, not a fancy one. Just something simple to show her that she was mine and I was hers. That summer, a friend of mine offered me a 3-week job hauling hay on a farm about an hour away. The work was hard. The sun beat down relentlessly. My clothes soaked with sweat, and dust would clog my throat with every breath I took. But every night, I would call Lily from a creaky payphone, and her soft, sweet voice on the other end made the exhaustion fade away. If only for a while. I'd tell her how much I missed her, how I couldn't wait to get back home. I'd picture her face every time I tossed a bale of hay. I imagined her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, and the way my heart would race whenever she was near. But little did I know, my mom was counting the days too, just not for the same reasons. When I finally returned home to Harriston, my truck rattling down the familiar main street, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I had worked hard, made some extra cash, and I was finally able to start saving for the future. I stopped by Lily's house first, eager to see her. It was a little shotgun house with peeling paint and flowers blooming out front, the ones she had planted herself. But when I knocked on the door, her mother answered. "She's not here, Jake," she said, her lips tight like she'd bitten into something sour. "You best talk to your family." My gut twisted. What was going on? I could feel something was off, but I had no idea what it was. I drove home, confusion swirling in my chest. And when I walked through the door, I was met with chaos. Mom was in the kitchen, barking orders at James like she was the general of an army. James, my brother, standing at 6'3", always so confident, always smirking, was leaning against the counter, his usual cocky grin plastered on his face. And then I saw it. The ring. A cheap gold band, one that didn't match the one I'd been dreaming of buying for Lily. "Where's Lily?" I asked, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. Mom turned, wiping her hands on her apron like she was brushing me off. "She's with James now, Jake. They're engaged. It's done." The room spun. I looked at James. His grin widened, like he'd won some prize. The anger started to bubble up in me, but I fought to keep it down. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded. "She's with James? What happened?" "Calm down," Mom snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Lily needed a man, not a boy chasing pipe dreams. James is strong, steady, he's got a future. You're just you." Her words hit me like a slap. I had spent my life trying to make her proud. I worked hard, fixed things around the house when they needed it, did whatever I could to make sure she didn't have to worry about bills. And James? James coasted. He leaned on his charm and never lifted a finger unless it benefited him. And now, he had Lily, the girl I loved. I stormed out of the house, my tires screeching on the gravel as I drove back to Lily's. This couldn't be happening, but when I got there, she was sitting on the porch swing, her eyes red from crying. "Is it true?" I asked, my voice tight with hurt and confusion. She nodded, her hands twisting together in her lap. Your mom, she said you'd never be enough. That James could take care of me. I didn't know what to do. Jake. I didn't know what to do. My heart sank. She could have waited, could have called me. We'd been together for 2 years. And in those 2 years, we had built something together. But now, everything felt like it had crumbled. She apologized, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything back. I just turned and walked away. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the walls. I looked around at the pictures of us as kids, me and James. Fishing together, Mom smiling at a picnic. It all felt like a lie. I wasn't their family anymore. I was the spare, the one they threw out when something shinier came along. By morning, I had made up my mind. I packed a duffel bag with the few clothes I had left, a toothbrush, and the last of my money, just $50 from hauling hay. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't stay where they'd thrown me away. Mom was in the living room, knitting, like nothing had happened. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Where are you going? She asked. Her tone as indifferent as always. Anywhere but here, I said, and without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out. I wasn't sure where I was headed. I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not to Harriston, not to them. They had broken me once, and I wasn't going to let them do it again. So, I drove, not knowing exactly where I was going but knowing I had to leave everything behind and build something they couldn't touch. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in Harriston. Not in that small town where everything and everyone reminded me of what I'd lost. My truck rattled down the highway, the radio buzzing with static. I drove for hours, pushing myself past the point where my mind could focus. The gas gauge was flirting with empty. But I didn't stop until I found myself in Easton, a much larger city that felt like an entirely different world. Easton was full of concrete, noise, and people I didn't know, people who didn't know my past. I parked my truck behind a diner and spent the first few nights sleeping in it. My only company, the sound of the world moving around me. I washed up in gas station sinks, brushed the grime from my face, and fought the hunger gnawing at my stomach. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't go back. I had to keep moving forward. I needed a job, any job. I walked into every place with a "Help Wanted" sign. Boots scuffing the pavement as I presented myself to anyone who would listen. Most people took one look at my faded jeans and shrugged me off. "We'll call you," they'd say, but they never did. Eventually, I found something. A warehouse job loading crates for $10 an hour. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I had dreamed of when I was still in Harriston, planning for a future with Lily. But it was a start. My arms burned after my first shift, sweat dripping into my eyes as I hauled boxes of car parts or whatever else they needed shipped out. The foreman, Rick, was a no-nonsense guy, barking orders like a drill sergeant. I hated it at first, the yelling, the endless work, but every time Rick shouted at me, I thought of James's smirk, of the way my mother had dismissed me. I thought of everything they'd made me feel, and I gripped my teeth and kept going. It was hard, brutal work, but I wasn't the same kid who had left Harriston. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I wasn't going to let the past define me. I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. Every day, I pushed myself harder, knowing that one day, it would pay off. The nights were the hardest. I rented a cheap motel room, the walls thin enough to hear the man in the next room coughing up his lungs. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to block out the silence. But it was hard. I thought about Lily. I wondered if she was happy with James, if she even thought about me anymore. But then I'd hear Mom's voice in my head, telling me that I was just me, that I would never be enough. But I couldn't afford to let it all consume me. I couldn't let it stop me. One day, I saw a flyer tacked to a pole outside the warehouse. Night classes. Learn a trade. Build a future. It caught my eye. That word, future. I signed up for a basic computer course at the community college just a few blocks away. I'd never been big on school. I barely scraped through high school. But something about that word stuck with me. I remember the first night of class. It was a room full of tired people, hunched over clunky old PCs. The teacher, Mr. Hayes, was a wiry guy with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He said, "You don't need to be smart. You just need to show up." And I thought, I can do that. That's where I met Sarah. She was in the back row, tapping away at her keyboard like she had been born with it in her hands. Short brown hair, freckles across her nose, and a smile that didn't feel forced. We got paired up for a dumb assignment to make a spreadsheet. And I fumbled through it, cursing under my breath. Sarah leaned over to fix my mess, her fingers flying across the keys with ease. "Relax," she said. "It's not brain surgery." After class, we grabbed coffee at a diner across the street. I had black coffee, she had cream and sugar. She told me she'd grown up in Easton, worked as a cashier, but she didn't want to stay behind a register forever. "I want more," she said. I couldn't help but admire the way she spoke. I felt the same way, lost, but hopeful. We started talking more after class, mostly about the course, but then we found ourselves talking about everything. Movies, music, the best cheap eats in town. For the first time since I'd left Harriston, I felt like I had something worth holding onto. Sarah didn't know the story of my past, and I didn't feel the need to share it. With her, I could just be Jake, and that felt like a gift. I wasn't defined by my history, and maybe, just maybe, I could build something better. Something for myself. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was a start, and for the first time in years, I felt the spark of hope that maybe life wasn't finished with me yet. Years passed, and Easton became home. It was where I built my life, where I found my rhythm. I kept working, kept pushing, and kept learning. The warehouse job turned into something better, and eventually, I found myself working at a startup. Nothing fancy at first, just running errands and hauling equipment. But as I learned more, as I watched and listened, something clicked inside me. I could see the bigger picture, how things fit together. The startup needed someone who understood how to keep things organized, someone who could manage operations. Tim, the guy who hired me, saw something in me too. He gave me a chance, and I took it. With Sarah by my side, I started making progress. She supported me when things were tough, when I felt like I wasn't good enough. We had our little apartment. Nothing special, peeling paint on the walls, a mattress on the floor. But it was ours. It was where we built our own world. A quiet corner away from the chaos that had followed me from Harriston. One night, after a long day, I took a leap. I asked Sarah to move in with me. I didn't have much to offer, but I knew she was the one I wanted to share it with. She said yes, and that was the moment I realized that maybe I wasn't so alone anymore. We started building something real together. A home, a life. As the months passed, the startup grew. Tim trusted me more and more. I began managing operations, handling budgets, shipments, and schedules. It was hard work, but I thrived. I was in charge of something for the first time in my life. The company expanded rapidly, and soon, we were scaling up. Offices opened, investors lined up, and before I knew it, I was running the operations for a company worth millions. I couldn't believe how far I had come from that broken kid in Harriston. Sarah was with me every step of the way. She became the face of the company, charming investors and clients alike, while I stayed behind the scenes, making sure the gears turned smoothly. I didn't need the spotlight. I was fine with that. I didn't care for the fancy dinners or the interviews. What mattered to me was that I had a family, a purpose, and a future. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the success. It was about proving to myself that I could do it. I had been written off by so many people, by my family. But I wasn't that same kid anymore. I had built something real. One night, after a long day of meetings, I was sitting on the couch with Sarah. The kids had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet. I felt a strange peace settle over me. The past wasn't gone, but it no longer had the power to control me. I was in control of my life now. and I had everything I needed. But then came the call. My phone rang, and I saw the area code from Harriston. My heart sank. It was Uncle Pete. "Jake," he said, his voice gruff. "Your dad's gone. Heart attack. Funeral's Saturday." The words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't spoken to my father in years. Not since I left Harriston. He had never stood up for me. Not like I had hoped he would. But now he was gone. And there was something in me that told me I had to go back. Not for my mother. Not for James. But for me. For closure. I didn't want to go. I didn't need to. But something in me urged me to face it. To see it through. So, I packed my bag, put on a suit that I hadn't worn in years, and told Sarah I'd be back soon. She didn't argue. She knew. She knew I had to go back. As I drove back to Harriston, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a line. One I had drawn years ago when I left. The town had changed in small ways. But it still felt the same. The familiar gas stations, the broken signs, the sagging porches. It all felt like a place I no longer belonged. But this time, I wasn't the broken kid anymore. I wasn't the one they had cast aside. I was different now, and when I walked into that church, I was going to make sure they saw that. They were going to see the life I had built. They were going to see me standing tall. As I stood at the back of the church, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the years pressing down on me. The whispers of old friends and family members. The looks of surprise and confusion. They all seemed to fade into the background. This wasn't about them. This was about me. Finally letting go of a past that had shaped me but no longer defined me. When I stood up to read my father's letter, I wasn't just reading words on paper. I was reading the final chapter of a story I had carried with me for so long. My father's shaky handwriting, his acknowledgement of the man I had become, struck a chord deep within me. I wasn't the same person I was when I left Harriston. I was stronger. I had built a life from nothing. With my own hands. My own choices. After I finished reading, I called my family, Sarah and the kids, up to join me. Their presence, their steady hands in mine, made everything else seem insignificant. I led them back to our seats, leaving my past behind for good. As we left the church, I felt lighter. Freer than I had in years. My mother's face, James's glare, and Lily's regretful eyes didn't hold the power they once did. They had made their choices. And I had made mine. And in the end, my life was mine to live. I knew I wasn't going back. Not to Harriston. Not to that version of myself. I had a future now. One I had built with love, hard work, and the unwavering support of the people who truly mattered. Thank you for joining me in this journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories. We appreciate your support and look forward to sharing more with you soon.